It has been a momentous day for those of us that know that Lucy Letby is innocent, as the Crown Prosecution Service dropped the completely frivolous charges that Cheshire Police have attempted to file against her recently. This obviously does not affect the fact that she's currently in prison facing 15 other trumped up charges, but it's a start. In this video, I'm going to examine all of the issues related to this news that is the first good news we've had about the debacle of Lucy Letby's conviction for quite some time. So, as reported in The Guardian here, the former nurse Lucy Letby will face no new charges on suspicion of murdering or harming babies, prosecutors have announced. Letby, 36, is serving 15 whole life prison terms after being convicted of murdering 7 babies and attempting to murder 7 others in the year to June 2016. The Crown Prosecution Service have been considering further charges against Letby in relation to 9 babies, including the alleged murder of a baby at the Cancer Chester Hospital and another at the Liverpool Women's Hospital. However, it said the evidence did not meet the test required to bring fresh charges. So in the remainder of this video, I'm going to go over all of the news and all of the issues related to this, and some of my personal reflections on this news and what it means for Lucy Letby's prospects. So here we have a statement from the Crown Prosecution Service, so I'll read through the statement first. No criminal charges against Lucy Letby in relation to further allegations of deaths and non-fatal collapses of babies. Frank Ferguson, head of the Crown Prosecution Service's Special Crime and Counter-Terrorism Division, said, "We received a file of evidence from Cheshire Constabulary in July 2025 asking us to consider further allegations against Lucy Letby, 36, relating to deaths and non-fatal collapses of babies at the Cancer Chester Hospital and Liverpool Women's Hospital. Following a thorough review of that evidence, we've decided that no criminal charges should be brought in respect of those further allegations. The Crown Prosecution Service considered offences of murder and attempted murder in respect of 2 infants who died and attempted murder in respect of 7 infants who survived. We concluded that the evidential test was not met in any of those cases. As always, this decision was made independently based on the evidence and in line with our legal test. The CPS has written to the families involved and will offer meetings to explain our decision making in further detail. Our thoughts remain with them. And then there's some notes for editors. 11 charges were considered in relation to a total of 9 babies, with both murder and attempted murder considered in respect of 2 infants. Of those 11 charges considered, 8 offences of attempted murder and 1 offence of murder related to the Cancer Chester Hospital, while 1 offence of attempted murder and 1 offence of murder, 1 infant, related to Liverpool Women's Hospital. The function of the Crown Prosecution Service is not to decide whether a person is guilty of a criminal offence, but to make fair, independent and objective assessments about whether it is appropriate to present charges for a criminal court to consider. In this case, we applied the law according to our legal test using the evidence. So I will just pause at this point, just to reflect on that. So the Crown Prosecution Service is stating here in this particular comment that the job of the Crown Prosecution Service is to decide whether or not it's appropriate to present charges for a criminal court to consider. And they are also claiming that all we did was our usual cookie-cutter thing where we looked at the evidence and then made a decision on whether or not we would charge on that basis. So I will call complete bullshit on that claim, because there are 11 charges here across 9 infants, and ostensibly it's very similar to the original court case. The reason that you think it is inappropriate at this point to present charges for a criminal court to consider is because you know that these claims are incredibly weak. You also know that the claims in the original court case were incredibly weak, and you also know that the prosecution would be completely annihilated in this court case because you're probably really struggling to get experts to support these cases, and you know you're going to be up against potentially 29 experts and possibly even more. It was inevitable that these flimsy charges would be thrown out by the Crown Prosecution Service, because if you put this case in court, you know that it would have been a complete embarrassment. So this assertion that we just did our usual process and all this time we decided that there wasn't enough evidence, you know you shouldn't have sent the first case to court. You know that very well. So please don't pretend otherwise. But I'll continue reading the document now. We will not be taking part in any interviews regarding this decision. You don't need to announce that because you never say anything to anyone. You never make any meaningful statements. You never hold yourselves to account. The taxpayers fund you. The Crown Prosecution Service receives, I believe it's £700 million of public money every year. You don't consider yourself to be an accountable body. You think you're above the law, virtually. And you certainly don't bother speaking to the great unwashed in any way, or participating in interviews, or making any constructive or meaningful comment. So I don't know why you feel the need to announce that, because you never make any comments and never give any interviews at any time. This decision is subject to the Victims' Right to Review scheme, which provides a victim or the families in some classes of case with a specifically designed process to exercise the right to review certain CPS decisions, not to start a prosecution or to stop a prosecution. Under the VRR scheme, if a new decision is reached, it may be appropriate to institute or reinstitute criminal proceedings. The right to request a review of a decision not to prosecute under the VRR scheme applies to full code test decisions that have been made by a Crown prosecutor, regardless of their grade or position in the organisation. Excuse me. It is important to note that the right referred to in the context of the VRR scheme is the right to request a review of a final decision. It is not a guarantee that proceedings will be instituted or reinstituted. Following a review under the scheme, qualifying decisions not to charge, to discontinue or to withdraw can be instituted or reinstituted, subject to any statutory time limits. There are two possible review outcomes: a new decision when the earlier decision is overturned, or uphold previous decisions. So all of that information there about the victim's right to review means that presumably the families could ask the CPS to review the case, theoretically. I mean, it would be it'd be extraordinary if they reviewed it and then decided to charge Lucy on that basis. But theoretically, that would seem to be possible based on this text here. That just seems to be a statutory thing that they must put in place. I don't know if we really need to give that too much consideration. So as you can imagine, this has been trending on Twitter. It was one of the top trending topics on Twitter today. It's been all over the media. And one of the things that's come out, as would be expected, is a statement from Lucy's barrister, Mark McDonald, who said, "Lucy Letby has always maintained her innocence. She has never hurt a child and never would. It is vital that the case is now referred back to the Court of Appeal as a matter of urgency. 31 reports have been submitted to the CCRC, compiled by 26 internationally renowned experts, which provide overwhelming evidence that no babies were murdered. The reality is that a young innocent woman is in prison for crimes she has not committed." And there is nothing that I can add to that statement. So now we'll move on to what the police, Cheshire Constabulary, had to say about today's events, or yesterday's events, by the time that this is released on YouTube. Today, Tuesday 20th of January 2026, the Crown Prosecution Service announced that it will not be charging Lucy Letby with any further offences after reviewing files of evidence that Cheshire Constabulary submitted in July 2025. This is not the outcome that we had anticipated throughout our investigation. We were confident that we held enough evidence to take to the CPS. So I'd just like to mention you did take it to the CPS. So that's just like a little grammatical thing I'd like to point out. We submitted files for charging decisions in relation to 9 babies for consideration of 9 offences of attempted murder and 2 of murder. We believed the evidence submitted met the CPS charging standard. The CPS did not agree, and despite our representations, we must respect the decision that has been made. So what I would say with regard to this is that I listened to a news report from 5 Live, and of course, given the fact that it was the BBC, it was of the usual abysmal standard. But even that news report stated that it's very unusual for the police to kind of bite back at the Crown Prosecution Service in this way. we know the reason why Cheshire Police are doing this is because they know they've screwed up really badly, and they know they're in the firing line, and they know this is going to seriously stain their reputation for decades to come. And I will never let them forget this. For people that worked on this investigation will never forget this, I can assure you. And then they go on to make some other fairly extraordinary statements. There will be some who will feel that this is news worth celebrating. Okay, so I assume that that's directed at myself and people like myself who rightly believe that Lucy Letby is innocent. Well, let me say, you're absolutely correct that there is nothing to celebrate. Let me explain to you why there is nothing to celebrate. So Lucy Letby has been bullied at work, forced off the neonatal unit without the presentation of any evidence. She had to endure constant suspicion. She was put in an awful position at work that was already traumatic in and of itself. Then she was arrested by you 3 times, interviewed 30 times. She patiently cooperated with all of that process, answering very fluently and quite obviously very honestly throughout. You ignored absolutely everything that could have been used in her defence and used everything that you possibly could against her. You denied her bail. You incarcerated her for 2 years while she awaited trial. Just before she was due to appear in court, she was forcibly moved from one prison to another. Many of her personal belongings were lost. She had a nervous breakdown. She was suffering from PTSD. She then endured one of the most high-profile court cases in living memory, throughout which there was constant fabrication and basically lies spread around about her. This lasted for 10 months. It was an incredibly traumatic experience. She knew all the time that she could be found guilty and imprisoned indefinitely for what were the most heinous allegations. Every second she spent in the courtroom, she knew people were looking at her. She knew there were tabloid headlines about her. Then she was found guilty. She was afforded no defence witnesses in court. Character witnesses were actively discouraged from appearing in her favour. She was sentenced to a full life order with no hope of parole. She was denied 2 appeals. She's being held as a Category A inmate in complete solitude under constant threat of retribution from fellow prisoners. And she's facing 15 full life orders. And you're still talking crap about her in a pathetic attempt to defend your own reputation. Although, on the subject of celebrating, you certainly felt no embarrassment about celebrating when you won some crappy award. So yeah, you're right. There's nothing to celebrate. I'm not celebrating. There is nothing that is worthy of celebration. This is a small relief from this overall debacle for which you are primarily responsible. So you're absolutely correct that this news is not worth celebrating. We do not share this view and would ask that people respect the privacy and feelings of the families involved. Well, Cheshire Constabulary, let's address the privacy of the families involved firstly. So we don't know who the families are. No one knows who the families are other than you. So of course we're not going to invade their privacy. No one's going to invade the privacy because you asked for so many anonymity orders in relation to the court case. No one knows who anyone is. Even some of the witnesses, we don't know who they are. So how are we going to invade the privacy of the families? It doesn't even make any sense. As for the feelings of the families involved, you are responsible for that. It's your fault that you've disturbed 11 more families seemingly, and you've told them, we think someone has murdered your children. They will probably now believe that for the rest of their lives because you've polluted them again, as I've discussed in a recent video on Operation Hummingbird, and as I'll be discussing again in forthcoming videos that will be coming up shortly. You have pestered them, you have bothered them, and you have put this case to the Crown Prosecution Service. It's you who have upset the families, not anyone else. There's no way that we can upset the feelings of the families. We don't even know who they are. And frankly, after this debacle of a court case, and now this new debacle where you've put cases to the Crown Prosecution Service that I believe you knew damn well that they didn't meet the charging standard. To pretend otherwise is a complete farce, in my opinion. It's you that's upset the families, and for you to now try and take the moral high ground and pretend that you're concerned about their feelings is embarrassing. The sole reason you brought this prosecution was to try and defend yourselves and to try and keep criticism quiet for a bit. So to now say, oh, don't upset the families, is embarrassing. We are deeply grateful to the experts and witnesses who have contributed to this investigation. Oh, I'm sure you are. I'm sure you're enormously grateful to them. their input has been invaluable in answering many difficult questions on behalf of the families. Well, clearly it hasn't. Clearly it hasn't, because the families had no questions, and then you, as I say, went to the families and pestered the families and upset the families. You've put this case in court. Obviously, it's been thrown out by the Crown Prosecution Service because they know they would be annihilated. According to what we've heard, there are only 2 experts involved in this case. One of them is the guy Yoxall from Liverpool Women's Hospital, and there's supposedly another neonatologist. Although whether it's related to this case or not, we don't know for sure, because Cheshire Police never answer any questions and are not transparent in any way and don't consider themselves to be publicly accountable. So we don't know a great deal about this case. But to say that their input has been invaluable is highly debatable, because what you've actually done is upset a load of people, waste a load of money, and embarrass yourselves further than you had already. Today's announcement does not affect or undermine the convictions of Lucy Letby for multiple murders and attempted murders of premature babies following an extensive investigation and 2 criminal trials, including one of the longest running murder trials in British criminal history, and 2 unsuccessful appeals. So let's just firstly deal with the 2 unsuccessful appeals. That's factually incorrect. Lucy Letby hasn't appealed against her conviction. She applied for the leave to appeal and was denied the leave to appeal. That's the first thing. In terms of it being one of the longest running murder trials in British criminal history, that doesn't mean that it's a strong case. I've discussed this many times on the channel. If there is a strong and definitive case with strong and definitive evidence, then the trial will be short. The fact there was a long trial does not count in favour of the original case. In terms of whether or not it affects or undermines the convictions, the reason that the Crown Prosecution Service hasn't taken this case to court is because they know that the evidence that comes from the expert panel, and potentially more experts in the future, does indeed affect and undermine these convictions, and they know that taking this case to court would further undermine those convictions. So in a way, you're fortunate that the Crown Prosecution Service hasn't decided to take this to court, because it would have undermined you further than you've already been undermined. And then there's the further extraordinary comments from Cheshire Police. This decision by the CPS will have no impact on Operation Duet, our ongoing investigation into corporate manslaughter and gross negligence manslaughter at the County Chester Hospital. These remain separate investigations. So basically what they're going to try and do now is hide behind this. So they can't hide behind their ongoing investigation into Lucy Letby anymore. So now they're going to hide behind their supposed investigation into corporate manslaughter and gross negligence manslaughter. But you know damn well, Cheshire Police, that you will never charge the executives, because you sat in a room with them on the 12th of May, 10 days after the case was passed to you. On the 2nd of May 2017, the case was passed to you with what you admit was no evidence. You wrote in your own documents there is no evidence other than coincidence. And 7 days after you wrote that, on the 12th of May, you sat in a room with the 3 executives that you've no doubt charged. We don't know because you haven't released their names, because you don't believe in transparency. That's very obvious. You sat in a room with these 3 executives, what we presume to be the 3 executives that you've charged, and you agreed with every word that they said as they told you that there's no reason to investigate. So the idea that they were negligent, and the idea that it's their fault that infants died on the unit because they should have reported the crime to you, the supposed crime to you more quickly, you know that's without foundation, and you know they will never be charged. So we're now going to see the pathetic spectacle of you hiding behind what you know to be a completely frivolous investigation that will never go to court. It can't possibly go to court because in the Thirlwell documents there is just overwhelming evidence that the executives couldn't possibly have done anything else other than what they did. And indeed, you agreed with this at the time when you spoke to them in your police station. And then finally, the Cheshire Police say, our thoughts remain with the families affected by this. Do they really? Do your thoughts really remain with the families affected by this? Is that really why you decided to take up this case? Is this really why you decided to upset 11 families? Is this really why you put these trumped up cases in court and the Crown Prosecution Service has thrown it out of court? It's entirely, if the families are upset, we don't know because we don't know who the families are, even though you said we need to respect their privacy. How can we do anything else? We don't know who they are. So if the families are indeed affected by this, as you suggest, and if you're the only people that know who the families are, you'd be the best placed people to judge. If the families are affected by this, it's your fault. So the fact that your thoughts remain with them, they should be with them because it's entirely your fault if they've been affected by it. So then we'll move on to the final comment of Dr. Dewi Evans, who is definitely never going to comment on this ever again. And he had the following to say. And I will interrupt him throughout his letter rather than read out the whole letter first. I had anticipated that there would be no further presumably he's supposed to say charges rather than changes, some time ago. Well, that's interesting, Dewi, because you told us repeatedly that, I think Lucy Letby is definitely guilty of more crimes. I think there should be more charges. I've identified 25 more cases. I think the police need to send this back to court. I think she's guilty of the third insulin case. Do you remember saying all these things? So when you said you anticipated that there'll be no further charges some time ago, when was this exactly? Because every single previous public statement you've made indicated that you thought there would be further charges, and that you thought Lucy was guilty of further murders and attempted murders. So this must be some indeterminate period where you realised that everything that you said previously was complete crap. But as you've contradicted yourself, I don't know, let's be generous and say 100 times by now, that it's not that surprising that you'd contradict yourself again. Let's move on to paragraph 2. I'm not familiar with the individual cases involved with the current investigation. So you're not familiar. So you said you passed a load of cases to the police. You've commented on this previously. You've commented on the third insulin case. You've just sent some stuff to Cheshire Police regarding one of the other children. You've commented on this numerous times, but now you're not familiar with the individual cases involved. But despite the fact that you're not familiar with individual cases involved, you'd already anticipated that there'd be no further charges. So you're able to see into the future, even when you have none of the details about the case. Although previously you said you did have some of the details about the case. So I'm slightly confused about this comment already, but let's continue. But believes that the evidence of death or injury due to deliberate harm would not meet the threshold of being beyond reasonable doubt, the high bar required correctly to obtain a criminal conviction. It's probable that the infants involved were unwell, very unstable. So let's just unpick this. So he's saying here it's probable that the infants involved were unwell and very unstable. So I thought you had no knowledge about the cases. So this is just absolute speculation, firstly. But we'll return to that in a second. Secondly, the evidence of death or injury due to deliberate harm would not meet the threshold of being beyond reasonable doubt is not something that the Crown Prosecution Service considers. That is something that happens in a court case. That is what the court has to prove. If there is evidence, there's a certain evidential level that has to be met by the Crown Prosecution Service. And if that evidential level is met, then they put the case in court, and then it is the court's decision to decide whether the threshold of being beyond reasonable doubt is met. I'm sure you know that, given that you're always boasting about how many court cases you've been in. But now you're an expert at the Crown Prosecution Service as well, although you're absolutely categorically wrong about this. In terms of the infants involved being unwell and very unstable, you've just basically said that what you provided for the original court case is worthless, because we know that the infants involved in the original court case were unwell and very unstable. It's just that you never bothered to look at any of this, as we will discuss further in a forthcoming video. If one could not rule out the possibility of the deterioration being the result of a natural cause, however unlikely that scenario, it would be futile to proceed with a criminal prosecution. So again, this is just complete rubbish. So we know for a fact that in the original court case, similarly, we cannot rule out the possibility of deterioration being the result of natural causes and indeed mistakes on the unit. We also know that you never bothered to look at any of these things. That's why you never discovered any of it. So again, it's nothing to do with this scenario being unlikely, because that is for the court to decide based on the evidence. The difference in this court case would have been, as the Crown Prosecution Service recognises, the prosecution will be annihilated by the dozens of experts that would appear in Lucy's defence, just as you would have been annihilated in the original court case if you hadn't been presented with a complete open goal. Even in that court case, you were made to look like a complete idiot in court. And if you turn up to the Court of Appeal and say this kind of stuff, you're going to be humiliated in the Court of Appeal. I mean, that's basically baked into the cake anyway. That's in the future. Future Dewi's going to have to deal with that. But saying this kind of crap just makes you look stupid, because we know that there were natural causes involved in the deterioration of infants in the original case. And this is just pure speculation that you're engaging in when you say that you know nothing about these cases. You know nothing about these cases, but you've already worked out why the Crown Prosecution Service has not continued with the case. I mean, it's quite embarrassing. You shouldn't even be commenting. And all you're doing is making yourself look stupid. You're digging this now inordinately deep hole even deeper. I don't know how it could get deeper at this point, but it's just staggering. So then he says, I was aware also of concerns re alleged breathing tube displacements. Breathing tube displacements may occur accidentally, so proving a deliberate displacement at the beyond reasonable doubt threshold would be very difficult. So you wrote recently, just weeks ago, to Cheshire Police saying that in the case of child Q, you believe that Lucy Letby had deliberately dislodged a tube. I don't know if your memory... I know you're old, and I don't want people to see you as a doddery old man, because you're a very dangerous person. But you literally wrote a few weeks ago, you may have forgotten this, but you wrote to them a few weeks ago saying, I think Lucy Letby deliberately displaced tubes. So you must have believed that could be proven beyond reasonable doubt. Now, you believe it can't be proven beyond reasonable doubt. In the next paragraph he says, the CPS may also have considered that engaging in further prosecutions would be a gross waste of time and money. Is it not a waste of money for the police to investigate in the first place? I mean, this is total speculation. Who cares? Who cares what you think about the Crown Prosecution Service and why they've done this? The reason that they're not continuing is because they know, because they've done their evidential test, or at least that's what they claim. I don't believe this is the real reason, but they claim that they've done their evidential test and it doesn't meet their evidential test. So there's no need for you, who knows nothing, who's completely discredited, to speculate on why the Crown Prosecution Service have done what they've done. And I'd also ask the question, Dr. Evans, why are you so personally invested in this? Because let me remind you, you don't know anything about these cases. You don't know anything about what the police was doing, but yet you feel that you need to tell us why the Crown Prosecution Service have done what they've done. Why could that be, I wonder? Lucy Letby is already serving 15 life sentences following a conviction for 7 murders and 8 attempted murders. Thanks for letting us know. Thanks for letting us know, Dave. We appreciate that. We already know that. It's your fault that has happened. We're fully aware of that. It has nothing to do with this. Completely irrelevant. Cheshire Police are to be congratulated for their thorough review of hundreds of babies in Chester and Liverpool. Are they? Well, you don't know anything about this. You supposedly don't know anything about these cases. So you don't know that their review was thorough. And why are they to be congratulated, considering in the previous paragraph, you've just said that the Crown Prosecution Service believes that this is a gross waste of time and money. So why are you then congratulating Cheshire Police for sending the strongest of these cases to the Crown Prosecution Service, which has not met their evidential test and is, to use your words, a gross waste of time and money? But it's not a gross waste of time and money for Cheshire Police to investigate hundreds of cases that were even weaker than these cases. And also, let me remind you that you recently said that Cheshire Police, Crown Prosecution Service and the prosecution mixed up the dates in the court case. Obviously, we know that is completely untrue. So you seem to have forgotten about that now, and now you're congratulating them for their thorough review. Now Dewi says this. All were potential victims of England's worst, obviously a typing error. I mean, he made another one here at the start where he said further changes when it's supposed to be further charges. Female serial killer. So he put a lot of attention into this letter that he's put together. Cheshire Police had a duty of care to review the management of all babies exposed to Lucy Letby's care between 2012 and 2016. What does this have to do with you? You don't work for the police. You've nothing to do with Cheshire Police. You say you don't know anything about these cases. It's bugger all to do with you. Who cares about your opinion on whether or not they had a duty of care? It's literally nothing to do with you. Even if you were respected, you're not respected. You're a figure of ridicule at this point. It's not the only reason you can possibly be commenting is because you're concerned about your prospects. What other possible reason could there be for this asinine letter? I mean, it barely even meets the qualification of the term letter. Now, I know you like to quibble over whether something's a letter or a report. Let me suggest that this doesn't meet the standard of being a letter. And then there's the final paragraph. It's unlikely that this is great. It's unlikely this will be the end of the matter from Letby's point of view. Families whose babies have died or suffered life-changing injuries may revert to the civil court and consider a claim for damages alleging negligent care. The civil court threshold for proving clinical negligence is lower. On the balance of probability, this will be a matter for individual families and the legal team. So that will never happen. There's not even the slightest possibility that will happen. They're never going to take a case to the civil court that has been to the Crown Prosecution Service with all this other stuff with... Let me remind you, Dewi, just in case you've forgotten, there is this enormous cloud hanging over what you've done with regard to the original infants. So if you think that's just going to disappear, then suddenly things are going to get worse for Lucy because there's going to be a civil claim. That is never going to happen. That's just some fantasy world that you live in which people are going to forget about what an utter idiot you undoubtedly are. So I'm now going to go through a few issues that come out of this news today. The first one is, why did this case not meet the evidential test, but the original trial did? That'll be a very valid question. I can only give my opinion, which I can't prove, and I can be wrong, but I would bet my bottom dollar that it's nothing to do with the evidential test. They just knew they can't go to court. As much as these organisations say, oh, we always behave the same way and we don't let public opinion and we don't... That's just a load of flannel, really. I don't suppose for one second that these cases were less strong rather than those in the original court case. They'll be very similar. There'll be tube extubations, babies collapsed. And I'm going to discuss the fact that it's probable the third insulin case was among these cases. So the original cases shouldn't have met the evidential test, the so-called, esteemed evidential test that they kind of put on a pedestal like Excalibur almost. I mean, it's just some crappy test that they do. It's a cookie-cutter thing. That's why they made such a pig's ear of the original court case. So I don't really read too much into or give much credence to the evidential test, frankly. So as I mentioned, I suspect, or we suspect, this includes the third insulin case. So, Dr. Evans was certain that infant had been poisoned deliberately, even though it's a very obvious case of hyperinsulinism. And it's very significant that this case has been thrown out. We obviously don't know that it involves the third insulin case because they won't tell us anything about the cases, but it's very, very, very likely that it did. So that's very significant. It's notable that this filing involved actual deaths. We didn't know that until today, I believe, or we didn't know it with certainty until today. So that's very significant because infants died and they still didn't feel they could take the case to court. So it wasn't just tubes falling out, which obviously is laughable. We know it's laughable. Even Dr. Evans today has admitted it's laughable, despite the fact he wrote about tubes to Cheshire Police just a few weeks ago. But yeah, the fact that actual deaths were involved, again, is significant in my view. Does this mean that, this is a question someone asked me via email, does this mean the CPS are sceptical of the original trial? The CPS is an organisation, in common with most organisations and institutions in this country, that acts in its self-interest. So that's just my view. Again, I can't prove that. They would deny that. They would disagree with that. Obviously, they don't hold themselves accountable in any way, so they'll never answer questions. They've already said they won't answer questions on this. So I can say whatever I want and know that they will never answer me or indeed answer anyone else. So I just think they act in self-interest and they do what is in their interest as a body and what they think will be most favourable with regard to public opinion. That's just my, particularly for high-profile cases. Maybe for less high-profile cases, it's not such an issue. But for something of this magnitude, they just knew they would look ridiculous if they put this in court. They get annihilated. And it would weaken the original conviction, and they want to hang on to the original conviction because they're pathetic. This has implications for child K. If you can't put these cases in court, why was there a retrial on Child K? It's a slightly different situation because you don't have to put the case and the evidence before the Crown Prosecution again, and it was bundled together with the other cases, but the Crown Prosecution Service could still have thrown that retrial out for that entirely frivolous case that Dr. Evans has just basically said that's not a safe conviction. Why did that happen? When you've got 11 infants here, I believe, numerous charges, 2 infants are actually dead, and yet you don't think you can put that before the court because it doesn't meet the evidential test, but you could do a retrial for Child K. Why? Don't know why I'm saying why, because they've already said they're not going to answer any questions. Why did it take the CPS so long to deal with this? Well, aside from their obvious incompetence and basically the obvious incompetence and inadequacy of every major institution in this country, I would suggest it took them a long time to actually get round to looking at it because they're snowed under, underfunded, underskilled, etc., etc. That's the only reasonable explanation. This should have been thrown out very quickly. It's quite obvious that this should have been thrown out very quickly. Are there discussions going on behind the scenes? I think almost certainly yes. And I'm sure that's part of the reason why this case isn't going forwards, even though the Crown Prosecution Service are pretending otherwise. I've also received an indication from Thirlwell because a friend of mine has written to Thirlwell Inquiry. I can't show this letter or the response, but the response that he received was that Thirlwell is continuing and that they intend to stick to their timetable, which means we would hear something from them next month and they would publish the recommendations in April. I would suggest that is still potentially subject to change, but the indication they have given via their letter is that they still intend to proceed at this point in time. How stupid does Judith Moritz feel now? Well, I suppose there are 2 answers to this question. The first one is that she will feel quite considerably stupid seeing as she made it, and Jonathan Coffey as well, we shouldn't forget him. They made it a centrepiece of their rightly criticised Panorama documentary, if you want to call it a documentary. So I'm sure part of her feels quite stupid. And then I think the second answer to the question is you'd be surprised how impervious these people are to feeling stupid, and how impervious they are to facing the consequences of their actions. So she'll probably be largely unsullied and unaffected by it, but she should feel quite considerably stupid. And then I've also heard that Liz Hull is very upset by what has happened here. I obviously can't confirm this, but I've got this from a good source. So I just want to say I'm obviously devastated to hear that the esteemed, highly regarded, respected journalist Liz Hull is upset by this decision of the Crown Prosecution Service, and I'm sure everyone watching will also be devastated. I've been fortunate enough as well to get this statement from Dr. Steve Watts. I wanted to ask him what he thought about this, and he provided the following statement, and he's given me permission to read this out on the channel. So he said the following: I am pleased to hear the news that the CPS have declined to charge Lucy Letby in respect of additional evidence provided to them by Cheshire Police. However, at the same time, my thoughts are with the families of the babies concerned. They will be going through additional distress at this time. Although I do not know the extent of the evidence submitted to the Crown Prosecution Service, it clearly did not meet the evidential test, and the CPS have done the right thing on this occasion. I remain astonished that the same organisation thought that the evidence upon which they charged Lucy previously met the same high bar. I am very surprised by the rather immature, combative response to the CPS decision by Cheshire Police. In my career as a senior detective, I disagreed with the CPS on many occasions and sometimes had stand-up rows with them, but I would not have been so unprofessional as to make a public statement showing dissent. I think this arrogance may give an insight into the entrenched attitude of Cheshire Police more generally. I look forward to the CCRC moving forward in this and the case being sent back to the Court of Appeal on the basis of the overwhelming new evidence that demonstrates the verdicts against Lucy Letby are unsafe. Finally, I just wanted to read to you the comment that Dr. Svilena Dimitrova wrote on Twitter because I thought it summed things up perfectly, really. More than a year after it was clear to me, as a neonatologist who examined the patient records in the Letby case, that an innocent woman was in prison, and just under a year since Letby's new legal team submitted an application to the CCRC supported by multiple independent expert reports confirming that no murders occurred, though there was evidence of substandard and negligent care, the CPS has finally issued a statement. That statement confirms they examined just 11 cases. 11. Any competent neonatologist experienced in medical case reviews could have completed this work in a matter of weeks. Even allowing for political sensitivity and complexity, allocating 14 hours per case would amount to around 22 working days in total. This is why I suggest that they maybe took 5 months to begin. Instead, it has taken circa 52 working weeks to arrive at the unsurprising conclusion that no additional murders occurred, something that follows logically from the fact that the original convictions were not murders or attempted murders in the first place, but a series of miscarriages of justice using the same logic that underpinned the witch trials, built on flawed assumptions, vexatious reporting, and star expert testimony from someone with no relevant or recent neonatal clinical experience, which fueled groupthink and repetition of errors and cognitive biases. At this pace, it is difficult to avoid the conclusion that releasing the clearly innocent Letby will take at least another decade, and that meaningful institutional learning probably won't come for a quarter of a century, and I suspect fair consequences for all those who played a role in this miscarriage of justice will happen never. Over the past 18 months, I have had to come to terms with living in a system that increasingly resembles a closed loop of authority, where those in power are unable or unwilling to confront the possibility that they may have been wrong. There were so many opportunities for mistakes to be owned, but oh no, because acknowledging them would damage status, and status comes before integrity for plenty of those in power. Those who raise concerns are dismissed, marginalised, or ignored, and if they continue to speak up, their lives are irreparably damaged. Because let's face it, Letby's life has been ruined, and no meaningful reparations will be done in any timely manner to help her heal from what she has endured. And for what? For being a good nurse who flagged up problems and stood up for herself when she was targeted for doing so. But considering the backdrop of broader global instability, it is clear that life will deteriorate much further for us all, and things like Letby, miscarriages of justice, and patient safety are not quite high on the list of priorities right now. So whilst this is seemingly good news, in reality it will almost certainly make no difference, because if anyone in a position of power who had integrity had acted by now, Letby wouldn't still be in jail. Please prove me wrong. Anyone, please. So there's very little I can answer to that very eloquent statement. What I would like to particularly highlight is this comment about status. Status coming before integrity. So what I would like to say with regard to Svilena's comments is that since I've been working on this enormously important case, particularly since I began researching my book and now working on YouTube, I've met so many credentialed people. It's been a real privilege. Enormously esteemed doctors, professors, nurses, statisticians, scientists, and people from other fields as well. This is really my first time coming into contact with people of this background, apart from going to the doctor for GP appointments. I didn't have an enormously preconceived idea, but I did think it was possible that people with very impressive academic qualifications and careers might be a little bit sniffy or stuffy or egocentric. But every single person that I've met, male or female, has been incredibly charming and incredibly humble. There are more doctors coming up on the channel soon, by the way, and more professors, because more people have been getting in contact with me, and I've got several new guests lined up. Every person I've met has shared the same qualities, and there's a simple reason for that. They're good at what they do. They're not their job, or their title, or their status, or their position. They know they're good at what they do, and they know that they can be wrong. Because of that, they're always willing to listen to other people and always willing to speak to other scientists. One thing I didn't initially realise as well is that when I spoke to someone in a certain field, they almost automatically knew other people I'd already spoken with. That's true of someone who's coming on the channel soon. I wasn't connected to this person through a previous interviewee, but I immediately asked this person, do you know this guy? And of course he did, and he spoke very highly of him. The reason people like this behave the way they do is because they don't have to cling to status. They know they have their knowledge, their expertise, their competence, their desire to learn, their curiosity, and their desire to get better every day. That's what truly competent people are like. They don't need to say, look at me, I'm so-and-so, I'm this, I'm that, I've got this title, I've got this status, I've got this position. They don't need that. It's people who aren't competent, like Cheshire Police, who have to cling to that sort of thing. I'll give you an example which might seem a bit of a strange one. I'd cite the triad of supreme tennis players we've seen on the world stage, Federer, Nadal and Djokovic, and Andy Murray very much applies here as well. Although I was a Federer fan, all of them, in my view, incredibly admirable people. They show great humility, but also a relentless determination to get 1% better, even when they've reached the absolute pinnacle of their sport. I remember seeing Rafael Nadal preparing for a particular French Open, having been injured, after he'd already won it 11 times. Now, as a Federer fan, Nadal caused me a good degree of pain. But what struck me was there was no sense of, I've done this or I've won that. It was just, I'll get down to it, I'll work, and I'll work some more until I'm back to what I was before. And of course, he went to win on the French Open several more times after that. That achievement is extraordinary and will probably never be broken. And people like that, people who've reached the summit of their fields through expertise, knowledge, graft, hard work, determination, study, self-imposed standards of excellence, they don't need ego-driven status. They challenge themselves, they admit when they're wrong, and they know they can still improve. That's very different from what we see from many people in positions of power. I'm not saying they're all like that, but we know that many are. People in positions such as Cheshire Police, they wouldn't need to cling to these pathetic symbols of status if they were genuinely good at what they do. Same for the Crown Prosecution Service. I wish I could sit here and say the Cheshire Police are good at what they do, but they're lousy at what they do. I wish I could say the Crown Prosecution Service were good at what they do, but they're lousy at what they do. That's why they have to cling desperately, as I say, to these pathetic symbols of status, unlike the people that I'm very privileged to have met through working on the Lucy Letby case. I hope one day they'll be held to account, but like Svilena, I'm not 100% convinced that this will occur. Finally, I just want to say that I'm going to do a live stream at 7 p.m. this evening UK time so that we can further discuss this news. I hadn't planned to do this, but I think it's really important for us to get together as soon as possible. So I hope that some of you can make it.